Well-behaved women seldom make history is an often quoted statement of encouragement for women to make their mark in the history books of time by breaking out of the social constructs defined by men that confine women to quiet or submissive lives or both. One might suggest that in today's reading from Genesis, Eve was the first, at least in the biblical canon, of such women. First, by knowing her constraints, and in this fleeting moment of time broke those confines and constructs of silence to speak truth. She said clearly and plainly that she was tricked and ate the food they were not to eat. Adam was unwilling to uphold his part of the story. He was unwilling to own his actions. He skirted the issue and felt ashamed of more than his body. So he pointed a finger, accused, blamed, and shamed Eve, and the religious traditions that draw on the wisdom of Genesis have used this amazing story of creation by doing what Adam did, pointing the finger away from themselves when they do wrong, whereby separating God's creation. Religious traditions that ground their history in the first book of the Hebrew Bible were, and for the most part still are, bastions of male identity, leadership, and worldview. Just 2 chapters before the sharing of fruit, God said, "I have made you male and female in my image." God created us and named us very good, but something changed, and it changed quickly. The male experience and imagery of creation and God became the vision and power center of culture and has remained the prevailing teaching over the millennia. Walling off the fullness of God started early on. Christians didn't need to wait for the early church fathers, yes, the fathers, to get the ball rolling. It was already in full stream. Okay. Now that I got all of that out of my system, my upset at thousands of years and uncounted volumes of pages and scrolls and ink spilled on this subject, including my own, I hope I can offer a few, if even that, useful thoughts on the biblical story, the whole of the biblical story, not just the eating of fruit known as the fall, but on the rising of humanity as well. If we stopped at the 15th verse of the 3rd chapter of the first book of 66 in the Bible, we would be in trouble. Oh, hold on. Men have ended the story at this place, seemingly forever. So let's jump in a little further. I started this reflection with a quote used by women to empower women. Well-behaved women seldom make history. My mind has been running through the biblical characters who knew this truth deep in their souls and would not allow those cultural constraints of their age confine them to the best of their ability. Their faith or constrain their actions and their commitment to telling the truth, their truth. Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, Ruth, Naomi, Tamar, Mary, Salome, Lydia, and Phoebe, just to name a few. The biblical writers attributed spoken words to 93 women. Sadly, only 49 were named. This reflects 5, 6, 7%, 8% of all spoken words in the scriptural canon to women. Therefore, 93 to 95% were male voices. Women's words, however, were not uttered in a vacuum or whispered on the sidelines. Sarah, Abraham's wife, she laughed at God, and Tamar saves the Israelite spies from certain disaster and death. In Advent and Christmas, we hear the words of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the thoughts of her heart. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord, she sings, when with her cousin Elizabeth and 3 months pregnant with Jesus. On Easter, Mary Magdalene cries out, Rabboni. And she is the first to meet and name the risen Christ. Women's voices, and more importantly, actions, have had profound and unspoken impact on the life of faith. I want to know their names. I want to hear their words, to celebrate their successes and weep at their losses. But we cannot rewrite the biblical story even when we want to, or when I want to. Though we carry that history with us as Christian people, we need not repeat it, nor should we. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, a history professor and feminist Mormon at Harvard University, penned the quote of the day, "Well-behaved women seldom make history," in an academic paper raising up the stories of quiet, everyday women. To sharpen the point a bit further, the paper in which Ulrich wrote was describing the extraordinary lives of Puritan women who shaped a people and religion without recognition or desire thereof, and whose names are now lost. But the Puritan women shaped the Puritan tradition and formed it and molded it nonetheless. The preachers and ministers of the Puritan societies, possibly even Roger Williams, the minister and founder of the state of Rhode Island, received his credit and accolades because of the well-behaved women who seldom make history, but who made the world around him function. Raising up the voice of the voiceless is the rightful role for the powerful. So our culture says. So when the writer of Mark's gospel remarked that Jesus' mother, brothers and sisters were outside waiting to take him home when they thought he was out of his mind, a spotlight was pointed on the whole family of God. Parent, brothers, and sisters all have a part to play in the Jesus story, the human story, our story. Jesus solidifies this point at the end of today's gospel reading when he says, "Whoever does the will of God is my mother and sister and brother." God created both male and female. God's love and life is expressed in the fullness of humanity. God created God's likeness in female and male together and unseparated, and Jesus makes that truth his truth. The fall, as we often name it, of Genesis 3 is not of Eve's making, but our making. Through separating humanity by our choices, our desires, our lack of truth-telling, and separating ourselves from God. Jesus, the healer and restorer of all humanity, slowly knits together the disparate and broken pieces of our own undoing into the wholeness God created in the first chapter of the good book of Genesis, of the love story between us and the author of creation. Well-behaved women seldom make history, Ulrich wrote in 1976, but she didn't stop there. She continued, it is in the very dailiness, the exhaustive, repetitious dailiness that the real power lies. Living has to be measured by doing. Doing is showing up at the door to collect your crazy brother. Doing is telling truth when Adam was too afraid of the consequences of his behavior. Doing is showing up and listening to your crazy brother speak the truth of God and turning to do God's will. Showing up is healing the separation of humanity and listening to those who know how to do it. Being of the gender that is known for overt and covert, conscious and unconscious actions of oppression and misogyny. I only speak these words having attempted to listen first to those of you who make history live, written or unwritten, in the annals of time. That is a history of God I want to learn. Amen.
Amen.